All right, welcome back, dear viewers. Today I'm going to talk about A Red and Pleasant Land by Zach S. And the stars are aligned. I was planning on doing this anyway. And my crew just finished their little romp through the land of Unreason. And we now have the news that Zach S. is back with Lamentations of the Flame Princess. I see good times ahead for that company. Couldn't be happier for both James and Zach. He's very talented writer, author, game designer, artist. Very happy for all of them. So before we get into this, though, this is what I do. I play games. I record myself playing those games, and then I talk about those games. I got nothing against the flip through review, but I find that sometimes you just don't get anything out of them, and you end up spending money on something that looked good but isn't really. And then there are those games that are cheap, not well produced, but actually a lot of fun to play. And that's what I try to highlight on this channel. So let's get into it. So, A Red and Pleasant Land by Zach S. It is easily one of the most beautiful and creative settings I've ever read. And it is easily one of the most challenging module settings I've ever run. I don't think this is for a beginner GM. I think it is something that you want to use when you want to challenge yourself as a game master and you have players interested in being challenged in a way that they've never been challenged before. Though I do think this is a must-have to read if you're interested in world design, game design, because what Zach has done here is just phenomenal. And I cannot confirm or disconfirm the truth value of this, but there is a rumor that there might be a new release for this coming out. That's all I know. I don't even know how certain it is, but be on the lookout because if it does come out again, you should pick it up. I have a second printing. I should have showed it on the bigger screen, but it is a gorgeous book, absolutely gorgeous book. The premise of A Red and Pleasant Land is essentially, you can boil it down to like Alice in Wonderland meets Bram Stoker's Dracula. The land of Unreason, Voidya, involves 4 feuding vampire lords that are seeking to dominate the land. And they call it the Slow War because it's been going on for God knows how long. The main, I guess, sides are the Queen of Hearts and the Red King, and the other 2 are the Pale King and the Colorless Queen. They kind of like are jacking for position. It's a really wild take on Alice in Wonderland. It's a wild take on a vampire game. It's very unique, and it's a testament of what you can do when you just take 2 elements and just see what happens. The landscape, I guess all of Voidya used to be this gigantic, like miles long, like tens of miles, hundreds of miles of just like a castle that has been dilapidated and fallen apart. I think people have forgotten who used to run it, resided in it, and now you just have like this landscape that looks like a chessboard but of varying heights. You have gardens and forests growing on it, but then you can go underneath it, and that's sort of like it's underdark. It's called the interior, and it's just rooms and hallways of this ancient castle, fortress, and it's split by running rivers and canals, and of course vampires really can't cross those. I mean, they can, but it's tricky for them. There is a random terrain dungeon generator that uses a dice drops system, or you can just roll for traveling through and creating encounters. Much of what I did when running this in my campaign was I just used the dice drop. It was just so much it's just easier to do it for me, and it works really well if you're into like the no prep style of gaming, where you're just sort of like just gonna see what happens instead of like carefully planning a series of encounters. The book comes with a bunch of NPCs and monsters. The bestiary is actually one of my favorite parts of the book. It's inspired by Lewis Carroll's Through the Looking Glass. Like we have here, for example, an image of the Cheshire Cat and a mom wraith, and yeah, like it's just really creative, and you got some unique creatures here that are quirky, and they all pose interesting challenges to your players. Animals talk, as do some of the more monstrous creatures. Thus, every encounter doesn't have to be resolved with combat, and this is another thing I've noticed that Zach is pretty good at doing, is not telegraphing what you have to do to succeed in encounter. Like, it's just, what do you want to do, and is your idea going to work, as opposed to, you know, these guys will fight you kind of thing. I guess that does happen at times, but I really do appreciate that there's this option. Plus, it kind of fits. Like, the animals are talking to you. It's like you're in a Disney movie, but it's a horror film. Because there's vampires trying to eat you. Well, not really. It's kind of complicated. But anyway, there is a neat little guest generator, demon guest generator. So if you're in one of the castles of the vampire lords, they might have guests, and it's got like this really neat generator for like these unique creatures and persona. That never came into play in my running of this, but I might use it in the future. All right, so the vampires are very unique, and they're not your standard vampires. They're inspired by the 4 suits of a deck of cards and the pieces of a chessboard, because the slow war is like a great game that these vampire lords engage in. And I think they can be kind of tricky to use because they are incredibly lethal. The pawns are the weakest, and they may have like maybe only 8 hit points. But then you have like the more powerful like rooks and knights, and then of course the king and queens. They're not necessarily bloodthirsty, and they're not necessarily prone to violence. So they're not, just because you bump into a vampire in this doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be in trouble, though you can be. It's kind of hard to explain. We'll be getting into that a little bit. But if you want some unique takes on vampires, this is really cool just to read through. I have a picture here, the Red Knight, and I think those are, if I remember correctly, those are colorless rooks. They always come in pairs, and they're really slow moving. I actually really like that artwork there too. I think they look cool. Okay, so it is the land of Unreason. There are a lot of odd customs that the NPCs engage in. They like play croquet. There's some rules about that. They have banquets, stuff about that in this book. But there's also war going on, so there's intrigue. There's duels, and there's rules for those. You have actually, in this book, rules for conducting war, which I really haven't seen in Lamentations of the Flame Princess. So they never came into play while I was running this. I might borrow in the future. Borrow those rules in the future. The number one thing about every creature, with the exception of the Sphinx, they're all crazy. They take great offense at little things. They ignore larger insults. They have bizarre proclivities, like the Pale King likes to tax everything, and he's got a whole random chart on what he's looking to tax today. They're not necessarily prone to violence. They'd rather just argue you to death, and Zach actually includes like a section on and a chart that you can roll if you need it, on how to filibuster and just make something, just an argument, just keep going on and on and on, and they'll focus on some of the most ridiculous, um, I guess, points or inconsequential, things about the conversation, and make those more important than they really are, and they're just very difficult to deal with. They're generally not helpful to PCs. I think a good thing to do is to actually watch the Disney Alice in Wonderland and just watch her try to interact with the Mad Hatter. I mean, because that's essentially like how I ran NPCs. They were just not helpful at all, which can be kind of frustrating. There's some other aspects about A Red and Pleasant Land, in this land of unreason. Vodvoidya is something called the foreclusion. It's basically things happen before their cause happens. So there's like these time distortions that are occurring, and you can actually roll a random encounter that involves a time distortion. The causes can be prevented, but that means something else happens to ensure the foreclusion occurs. And there's a couple examples in the book, but the one that kind of made the most sense to me is you might find a child crying over their dead mother. Okay, so the players might go, oh, we got to save the mom, so they go save the mother, and then maybe they do, right? But then they find that the child ends up crying because someone told her her mom was dead. I tried to use this sort of. I don't know if this worked, but basically the players in the last couple sessions, they found children hiding in a well who were going to be who were great adventurers. They just hadn't grown yet. So I don't know. It's weird. It's like this. I'm not sure how I feel about it, to be completely honest with you. It's kind of reminds me of some Star Trek episodes where they're like doing all this weird time stuff. Growing and shrinking are a thing, and if you remember, especially if you watch the kids movies when you were younger, your growth and large spells, they're going to work differently here. That came into play a little bit in mine. In fact, that's actually how they defeated the Jabberwock. They shrunk them to an uncomfortable size, as described by the book. So that's a big thing. And you can find things that'll tell you, like, hey, eat me, drink me, and it might shrink you, make you large. There's these things called ore blocks. They're hidden locations where humans hide from the vampires. The vampires can't see them when they're in the ore block. Sort of not sure how I feel about this either. Again, you have a vampire world, so I guess you do need humans hiding in there because they're going to be feasted on. But at the same time, there's like sort of this idea that maybe the vampires aren't necessarily always hunting, like 30 days of night kind of thing. It's more, I guess, more like Bram Stoker's. They'll feed on them when they need to. But this kind of does allow for you to have spots in the game that you're running where the players can essentially rest, and maybe even engage in some trade and restocking their supplies. There is this whole thing about through the looking glass and mirrors, and this place called the quiet place. It's like this mirror dimension. So you have the war side and then the quiet side. The Red King, who's depicted here, it's another really good drawing piece of art here from Zach. Pale King's my favorite though, kind of horrific looking. But like the Red King uses the quiet side as a way of like traveling, having his troops travel secretly from one location to the next. I didn't use at all because I couldn't figure out a good way to use it, but there's like character doubles on the other side, and it's very weird. But there is this alternate dimension that like mirrors Vodvoidya. There's also children in wells. The vampires fear wells, so children hide in them, and that if you give the children food, especially good food, because they're living off of some bland stuff, they'll trade. They'll give the characters useful items that they've been collecting in their well. The game book comes with a new character class called the Alice. I really like this new class. I think it's very well designed because it really captures the feel of like Alice in Wonderland. Um, it's designed to be, it's essentially system agnostic, so you can fit it not just in Lamentations but OSE, Dungeon Crawl Classics, any OSR and OSR adjacent system, you could fit this in. They're kind of like thieves, so they start with a few thief abilities or skill points to put into those skills. They have hit points like a magic user, so they're not very strong or tough, I should say. They have saving throws that are described as one worse than the thief or the magic user. So I guess you have to pick whatever one is worse, and then you added one more worse. So they don't save very well. However, there is random level advancements. So starting at level 2, you roll a D100 chart, right? And there's a really good chance your saving throws increase. I want to say there's a 20% chance that you'll get a bonus to your saving throws. And then the rest of that chart is just like weird abilities and things that they can get that are titled like with lines and phrases straight from Lewis Carroll. It's really quite cool to read through. But what's really interesting is the Alice has this exasperation ability where once per game hour, so in real life hour, the character can just be exasperated about something. Like, oh, will I ever see the light of day trapped in this dungeon? Boo-hoo, right? And then the DM will roll a d12 and consult the chart, and something good happens. Something happens that helps the Alice out a little bit. It's a really, really interesting character class, and I really like it a lot. Mainly because it does really capture Alice in Wonderland. It's really cool. All right, I wanted to really touch upon this because there's an essay. It's like 1 page long, called "The Unreasonable," and I think this captures the heart of what Zach was trying to do. And I think if you do pick this up, you should read this multiple times because this will help orient you on how to run this. And it's an essay on whimsy and creepy, and it's really good. It kind of explains how to put this together in such a way that it's not like a typical Lamentations game where it's just like blood and gore, but it's creepy. It's going to creep the players out a little bit, or like leave them uncertain. And it's not going to be off the wall zany. It's going to be whimsical. So they sort of feel like they're in this wonderland, but there's just something off about it. It's a really good essay. I did want to bring up because when I was sort of prepping this for my campaign, I tried to do some research to get some ideas of what other people did with this, and I saw Prince of Nothing. Great guy in terms of his blog. I read it all the time, but he did talk about this book. I'm not sure if he really liked it, but I think he misunderstood it. In all due respect, because he lamented at one point there's 40% of the encounters are going to involve vampires. And we all know what vampires do. They charm you, suck your blood, and drain levels in the OSR, right? So 40% of the encounters is going to, in his mind, going to lead to a lot of character deaths as they're losing levels left and right. However, I think he was thinking in terms of like standard D&D, standard OSR games, and this is not a standard OSR game. Like the vampires aren't really going to be like these monsters that are hunting humans. I mean, they can be, especially if you insult them in this book. But my interpretation was they're just kind of walking around being who they are, and if they feel like eating you, they will. But generally, they're just going to like kind of talk to you, and that's kind of how I did it. Like they ran into my players ran into a red knight, and I just role played him like a beat cop. Like he's a red knight of the Red King, and he's on his beat, and he sees some weird stuff going on in a broken down asylum, so he's just going in there to check it out. The players, of course, were freaking out. The humans that they were with were freaking out. They ended up barricading a door, and I think one of the PC 0th levels humans got sacrificed or something to the Red Knight. But Yeah, but again, like I'm sitting there trying to keep this from being like pure horror and just sort of like, well, what would this be? A beat cop might have been a little too gonzo. I don't know, but anyway, um, this essay is like critical to understanding this book, in my opinion. A lot of random tables to use in here. I mean, like a lot. Some of it like will be useful in other games, and like you can port into other systems. Some are just specifically for this setting. Um, I have here an example of the dice drop table example here, and I found this infinitely useful. You don't have to do it this way. There's actually like a system of tables that you can just roll on if you prefer to do that. Um, in fact, if you're going to be prepping adventures prior to your game, it might actually be best to go through that system because it'll have everything like what's there, weird peculiarities of that location, that room, that clearing in the forest, that garden, whatever. And then maybe something's there. Maybe you're rolling on the random encounter table too to help figure out like what's there. There's adventure hooks, a random table for what animals are present. You have intercepted communications, these letters that can be discovered and what's in there, and that's how the players might get involved into the intrigue with the vampire lords. Obviously, it's got the loot the body chart that you see in almost everything Zach does. There's an idiotic filibuster conversations chart. I mentioned that earlier. And then a really fun chart's called Where Have You Been? And this is for when you have a player who misses a game session. You can just roll on this table. This is what happened to you. You fell in a hole and you just now climbed out or something like that. Some random, weird, whimsical thing happened to them, and that's why they weren't present at the last session. Very interesting stuff. Some of it, like I said, can be portable. Some of it's not. Like the demon generator table, I think you can use in other settings, other games that you're running. But they're just interesting to look at in and of themselves. Okay, so the art is great, and it's pretty typical of what I've seen in Zach's work. Even the maps have like this artistic quality about them that's beyond just good cartography. You know, you've seen cartographers draw really awesome maps, right? And you're just like, oh, that's a really awesome looking map. Well, I mean, here's the map of Vodvodia. I mean, to me, that's also kind of like a work of art beyond cartography. I really like how he uses the words like Carpathian mountains to like create the mountain range, right? So yeah, and a lot of the maps are like this. There's 2 maps of 2 of the castles located on this map. Castle Cachis, I hope I pronounced that right, and Panare. That's where the domain of the Queen of Hearts and the Red King, respectively. The rest, though, is up to you. So those are the only like dungeon maps that are available. I'm not going to talk about it because I don't want to spoil anything, but they're weird as hell. There's a lot of weird stuff that goes on, and yeah, a lot of weird stuff goes on in them. But they're cool, and they're just the artwork all around is great. I think I mentioned I love the Pale King. It's very scary looking. Frankly, I think it's kind of scary looking. I also like the Colorless Queen. That's a really nice image. And I like I think they were the Colorless Rooks. They were really cool images too. But there's a bunch of stuff in there, and it's very evocative, and really adds to the aesthetic and tone that a Red and Pleasant Land is. Trying to, evoke for everybody who plays it and reads it. Okay, so I'm sure I missed something, but that's essentially it. But I think I got everything. So so here's some thoughts, and this is my first one, and this is why I say it's challenging. This is a high level module, not in the sense of like your characters need to be high level, though that probably will help. But I mean for gamers, like this is all the usual tropes are thrown out the window. And generally speaking, players rely on those sword and sorcery assumptions to kind of maneuver through their D&D game worlds. These are not present here. Okay, I saw it with my players. Okay, the ground beneath their feet was constantly shifting. Whenever they thought they figured something else out, a new weird thing happened, and it totally, it was like a deck of cards. House of cards just got blown away. So they were getting frustrated. I could tell. I think they're happy that they've escaped Voidvoidia. But even for me as a game master, it was kind of exhausting to run because I wanted to make this world come to life to the best of my ability. And I'm also a big rules as written guy, so I'm like, I'm not going to change too much of this. I'm going to just try to keep it, and play it as best I can as what appeared to be intended. And again, going back to that essay, I'm like, okay, I'm going to try to do this. And it got kind of exhausting because it was just like, oh my god, another weird thing. Like, how do I interpret this? Or, I know what's happening, and how can I convey that to the players without breaking sort of like the rules of this world? Because the NPCs and the creatures and everything is unhelpful to the players. Just completely unhelpful to the players. So, in the end, well, number one, so yeah, it's a very challenging setting all around. And in the end, I think we all at my gaming table went a little touch insane thanks to this module. And if that was the goal, Zach, then bravo, you did it. You succeeded. Okay. If it wasn't, I don't know what to tell you. So, some more thoughts. Okay, there are some contradictions in this book that I kind of feel are difficult to navigate, but again, this is the land of Unreason, so I mean, it's intended. I believe it's intended. So, like, you got the vampires are the big one. Again, we think of vampires as these like creatures that are going to hurt you. Like, I can totally understand the kings and queens are like Dracula. They're going to be calculating, and they're not necessarily going to be hunters. But then you have like the rooks and the pawns, and so are these like 30 Days of Night vampires that are just running amok? Well, no, they're not. They have these weird peculiarities about them and these weird idiosyncrasies that adds to the challenge of running this module. Creatures, including large crocodiles, for example, would rather talk to you than fight. That's the sense I got from this, and that's how I ran it. And I'm not seeing much in the way of reward for players to talk other than to survive. And after a while, that gets old, in my opinion. So the players end up having an incentive to kind of kill things because they're not, unless there's no guarantee there's going to be treasure, especially if you're talking to a crocodile, right? And I think this adds to the level of frustration for the players. And kind of dovetailing into that, I guess my biggest gripe for this is there are no treasure tables really, other than I loot the body. I would have loved to see. I think there was a missed opportunity here. I think you could have had there was an opportunity here to like create some really whimsical and fun and maybe creepy magic items. So like I had some fun with like healing hay because the players were talking to a mule, Arthur Mule. I made the Vorpal sword, which was just a child's wooden sword that he painted up. And on a 19 plus, natural 19 plus, it'll cut something's heads off. But when everything else is just like does only D3 damage. So, and then the Sphinx had pies, and that just kind of happened randomly based on some dice drop rolls. I was like, oh, okay, the Sphinx got pies. They provide nourishment, that kind of thing. That was sort of created on the fly. But I really think there was a missed opportunity here. So, oh well. It is what it is. And then even more thoughts. Okay, here's an image of the Jabberwock, by the way. I love the Jabberwock. It's one of the coolest interpretations of a dragon, and I had a lot of fun running it. I think the players came up with some really cool ideas to take it down. And it is a pretty tough beastie, but I love it. The random terrain and room generators, especially that dice drop, I mean, is great for no prep play. Bravo. Like I there was plenty of times where like I have no idea what to do here. I'm just gonna see what happens, and we had some good times. The Alice as a character class, I've already told my players like this class is available to you if you want to play it. In my game world, I just kind of renamed it the Fool. Okay, but it's a really cool class, and I'm using it. So I will use a Red and Pleasant Land again. What I did for like my game world, I made it a part of the Unseelie Court where the dark fae reside, and they're vampires, I guess, right? And I will use it again. If the players ever end up going there, I'm going to pull this book out, and they're going to be back in the land of Unreason, this time doing something else, right? And what's interesting is because of the foreclusions, the Jabberwock might still be alive, so it's, and all the weird time distortions. Yeah, so it's an interesting book in that regard. I don't know though how good this would be for long-term play, and I have to actually kind of agree with Prince of Nothing on that one. Like, this might have been a better like short campaign thing, and that's how I'm going to use it. Is like, oh, you're going to the Unseelie Court. Well, let's pull out a Red and Pleasant Land and see what happens. Okay, you've left. You've left the Unseelie Court. Blah blah blah. We don't have to. We'll put this book back on the shelf, kind of thing. So yeah. But I do like this book. Okay, the $64,000 question: should you pick up a Red and Pleasant Land? Well, here is my thoughts on this, really, because I want to be fair. This book is gorgeous. I mean, it really is gorgeous. I'm not one to tell people to just buy something because it's pretty. But if you are into like world design and whatnot, like and evocative settings, there we go. I mean, it's worth picking up in that regard, and there is some useful stuff in here in terms of gameable stuff in here. This might be one of those situations where maybe you spend the money on the PDF first and just kind of look through it yourself and be like, and make a decision for yourself, because this is a challenging module, and I don't think if you're not really into serious, like challenging puzzle like encounters where things aren't what they seem, this might not be for your table. But again, like if you're into world building and want inspiration, this book is perfect. I mean, this book is, in my opinion, kind of sets the standard to some degree. So, but anyway, yeah. So there you have it. Again, hit like and subscribe, bell icon if this is something you like. If you made it through this video, I appreciate it. And stay tuned, folks. I got more to come. Peace.